What brought Buddha to the spa? Appreciation and cultural appropriation of Ayurveda and Yoga. A close look into post-colonial utilarisation and preservation. Originally a paper for the International Seminar on Reimaging and Reclaiming the Knowledge and Tradition of Bharat, Delhi, 2025. Yoga and Ayurveda have become widely recognized terms across the globe, with an estimated 300 million people practicing yoga. However, are they truly doing so? Originally rooted in the spiritual traditions of India, yoga has evolved into a global phenomenon, particularly in the West, where it often appears disconnected from its cultural and spiritual foundations. This raises concerns about cultural appropriation. Has yoga become yet another casualty of power and privilege in the Western world? Ayurveda, though inherently more integrated into daily life, has similarly been commercialized, often reduced to a tool for promoting pseudoscientific products. Superficial self-care tips have replaced the profound wisdom of the ancient seers, Vedas, and rishis. Ayurveda is now frequently repackaged as spa treatments within the expanding wellness industry, stripped of its cultural depth and surviving only through fragmented references. Even more concerning is the dilution of Ayurvedic education. What was once a rigorous system of knowledge transmission through the Gurukula and accredited Indian universities is now often substituted with weekend workshops and online courses in the West, many of which lack affiliation with authentic Ayurvedic institutions. A growing movement in the East is now reclaiming the virtues and values of yoga and Ayurveda. However, this effort is often overshadowed by individuals from within their own heritage, who commodify these traditions to cater to global demand, gaining dubious fame in the process. India itself faces an internal paradox. On one hand, striving to preserve its traditional culture, customs, and beliefs, while, on the other, embracing its identity as a rapidly advancing economic and nuclear powerhouse. Interestingly, Ayurveda and Yoga have become significant contributors to this economic growth, driven by the sale of products, retreats, and experiences to the Western world. This paper examines the impact of colonialism, the subsequent quest for identity, and the pressures of globalization on these ancient traditions. It raises critical questions. Had the globalization of values led to the appropriation and dilution of cultural heritage? Where does one draw the line between genuine appreciation, rooted in deep, respectful study of a culture, and cultural appropriation, where exoticism and commercialization dictate the selective adoption of knowledge? In the West, the use of sacred symbols outside their intended context is often overlooked. While desecrating Christian symbols is considered offensive, there is very little hesitation in printing the sacred Om symbols on yoga mats, only for practitioners to step on it. In this recording now, I want to explore the myths and realities surrounding the global perception of yoga and Ayurveda, examining the fine line between understanding and misunderstanding, romanticization and exploitation of cultural heritage. Understanding culture through tradition and custom. Culture is deeply rooted in the refinement of customs, beliefs, and shared identities within a particular group, whether defined by geographical boundaries or interconnected through a common heritage and diasporic communities. At its core, culture is an intricate system of symbols, meanings, and practices that shape collective identity. However, in today's globalized world, very few cultures remain untouched by larger belief systems that have historically expanded across nations, regions, and pre-existing traditions. Religions such as Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, Christianity have significantly influenced and in many cases absorbed and replaced earlier belief systems in the regions where they spread. The dominance of these faiths often led to the marginalization or erasure of indigenous traditions, making it nearly impossible to separate original cultural elements from the religious structures that later reshaped them. Religious expansion, whether through missionary activities, conquest, or socio-political influence, has played a pivotal role in shaping civilizations, often establishing new cultural hegemonies while diminishing societies with animistic or polyistic traditions. As a result, such groups were frequently excluded from the dominant cultural narrative and relegated to the status of pre-cultural or tribal communities. In any cultural identification, traditions and customs serve as external expressions of a shared worldview, what can be referred to as a common sense within a society. While traditions encompass rituals, practices, and beliefs passed down through generations, customs represent habitual behaviors and socially sanctioned norms unique to a particular group. Together, they form the foundation of cultural identity. The complexity of defining Indian culture. To explore cultural appropriation in the Indian context, one must first attempt to define India's cultural framework, its values, symbols, and heritage. Understanding which symbols are considered sacred, which gestures and customs hold deep significance, and how these elements serve as the markers of identity is essential. However, India presents a unique challenge in this regard, as it is home to an extraordinary diversity of cultures, traditions, and belief systems. The cultural landscape of India is not only characterized by an immense variety of customs, many of which are contradictory, but also by sharp contrasts in power, wealth, and societal development. The country simultaneously encompasses communities that preserve ancient ways of life, such as the indigenous tribes of the Andaman Islands, and modern technological hubs producing some of the world's most advanced innovations. With a population of 1.4 billion people, 22 official languages, and a staggering 19,000 languages and dialects, India is less a single culture and more a multicultural phenomenon. Colonial disruptions and the challenge of cultural identity. The long history of colonial exploitation, particularly under British rule, further complicates India's cultural identity. The partition of the subcontinent into India, Pakistan, and later Bangladesh disrupted century-old structures and delayed the formation of a unified national identity, if such a concept is even possible. Just as Europeans may identify as part of a broader European identity while belonging to distinct national cultures such as Irish, French, or Spanish, Indians navigate a similarly layered identity within vastly different linguistic, regional, and historical contexts. The arrival of the British East India Company in the 18th century and the subsequent colonial role led to conflicting ideals within Indian society. Western educational models, university systems, and bureaucratic structures were largely accepted by the elite, reshaping societal values and diverging from the traditional caste-based order. At the same time, colonial policies fostered religious divisions, particularly between Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims, exacerbating tensions that persist to this very day. These historical fractures have fueled ongoing debates about the preservation of cultural heritage versus the pursuit of modernization as India continues to emerge as a global economic powerhouse. India in the eyes of the post-colonial traveler. There is hardly a place in India where a temple is not built or restored. Festivals, decorations are not hung. Religious symbols are not worn, or rites, rituals are not performed. The constant presence of religion, spirituality, and rituals is striking to the Western visitor, who often seeks to take home what he believes he is entitled to. India's cultures have become objects of consumption, even in their most spiritual and sacred forms. Arundhati Roy writes, "There's a specific hunger for India to appear as a backdrop of spirituality, poverty, and exoticism. This is not a quest for truth. It is a marketplace demand for cultural caricatures." From the Field Notes of Democracy, 2009. Similarly, Nehru observed already in 1946, India was no longer seen as it was, but as the West imagined it to be, a romanticized Orient divorced from its realities. And Gita Mehta later echoed the sentiment. What the West consumed was not spirituality, but an aesthetic caricature of it, something colorful, quaint, and cleansed of all discomfort. From her book Karmakola, 1979. India has been shaped by the Romantic gaze, a perception that began in Germany in the early 19th century with Hegel, Schlegel, and later Max Müller. This raises the question, how much of this, what we see and experience now, is a genuine appreciation of India's heritage and culture? And where does appropriation strip India of its complex customs, reducing them to mere decoration? On the other hand, Western discourse often dismisses India as an underdeveloped country. This divergence as perspectives extends to Indian travelers and the global reception of yoga and Ayurveda, both subject to interpretation depending on the observer's standpoint. In both cases, India is seldom seen in its full complexity. Picking up the pieces, why the West is constructing modern yoga, branding meditation, and imagining Ayurveda. When did the West lose its sense of identity? Intergenerational trauma from wars and political conflicts left a void. Beyond the dominant religious traditions, primarily Christianity, millions sought of meaning and promises of balance and fulfillment, often through an exoticized vision of Eastern traditions. A journey through time, from post-colonialism to esoteric appropriation. During colonial rule in India, Ayurveda, meditation, and yoga remained largely quiet on a global stage. In India, most of its practice was actually forbidden and fined harshly. Only Swami Vivekananda went to Chicago Conference of Religions in 1890 and opened the sacred contact to the public eye of the West, but then with little impact at that time. However, this impact changed drastically when Maharishi Mahesh Yogi introduced his very own commercialized Hindu culture perspective on Indian medicine and meditation to the West. He was among the first to package and sell these traditions on a large scale. It helped him a lot, overcoming tax fraud fines and taking National Forest for his ashram in Rishikesh, to have hosted the top of pop culture in the West, besides many, to name the Beatles, who later distanced themselves regretfully from him. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Western societies were grappling with ideological turmoil. The Vietnam and Korean Wars, along with the US political involvement in Latin America, created deep rifts, not only within political institutions, but also in homes and families. For the first time, an entire generation in Europe and the US actively rebelled against their parents' conformity advocating for radical changes in values, morals, and politics. The idea of multicultural societies emerged as a pathway to global unity. At this time, Western youth sought new figures of moral integrity, wisdom, and guidance. An idealized India seemed to provide an exotic playground for these romantic aspirations. George Harrison, in union with Ravi Shankar, opened the gate for classical Indian music to the big audiences. What could possibly go wrong? Gita Mehta critiques this phenomenon karmakola, marketing the mystic East as the commodification of spirituality. It would appear that when East meets West, all you get is the neo-sannyasi and the instant nirvana. Coming at the problem from separate directions, both parties have changed upon the same conclusion, namely that the most effective weapon against irony is to reduce everything to the banal. You have the karma, we'll take the Coca-Cola, a metaphysical soft drink for the physical one. Sri Aurobindo had warned of such misinterpretations in the foundations of Indian cultures. He writes, India has suffered from having deeper spiritual ideals misunderstood and travestied by an alien mentality, which either could not understand them or brought to their interpretation preconceptions alien to their spirit. Even within the best intentions of the peace and hippie movement, an undeniable privilege shaped the fetishization of Eastern culture, distorting its essence. Arundhati Roy critiques this historical pattern. She writes, for centuries, the West has feasted on folk cultures, appropriating, colonizing, and then selling back their symbols devoid of any true understanding or context. From Capitalism, a Ghost Story, 2014. During the rise of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's influence, America was deeply divided. The countercultural flower power movement embraced Indian symbols, bindis, Om motifs, and Hare Krishna chants outside shopping malls. But these symbols quickly became trapped in privileged consumerism. As Reena Arya argues in Cultural Appropriation, analyzing the use of Hindu symbols within consumerism, their meaning was stripped away for aesthetic appeal. The West readily linked Indian spiritual philosophy, particularly ahimsa, non-violence, to the dream of global peace, without questioning its legitimacy or context. Instead of acknowledging India's struggle with colonialism, poverty, and famine, an idealized vision of spirituality took center stage. During the Vietnam War protests, the fall of the Shah of Iran, and other pivotal political events, a new psychological approach emerged in the culture named New Age. In the search for healing, Western intellectuals turned to expanded consciousness, with professors from Berkeley University, California, promoting the use of psychedelics as a shortcut to awakening the consciousness or even enlightenment. A small but influential group, including Alan Watts, Timothy Leary, and the physicist Fritjof Capra, popularized meditation, yoga postures, and psychedelic experimentation. Their goal was to blend Eastern empirical knowledge with psychoanalysis and hallucinogenic substances to enhance not only consciousness, but change social norms and reconnect with meaning. Here, cultural marginalization transitioned from appreciation to romanticism and ultimately to appropriation. Besides the honest dream of multiculturalism, cultural appropriation made its way. Reena Arya critiques this cultural phenomenon, highlighting how multiculturalism is often celebrated in a way that is politically progressive, yet ultimately superficial. She says, the celebration of diversity or multiculturalism conveyed is politically progressive. As mindfulness and meditation became popularized, they were altered to fit Western consumer culture. What was once a lifelong practice of devotion and restraint was reduced to commercialized promise of instant relief. The movie Kumare shows a painful self-experiment of the Indian-American filmmaker Vikram Gandhi, where devotional Western seekers are aiming to find inner peace and liberation by a self-projected image, whilst Vikram consistently tells them that he is not a guru and does not know anything, which, in contrast, makes him even more appealing to the seeker. The image of the Buddha, once a symbol of deep meditation, samadhi, became a decorative object, advertising authenticity without context. Eric K. Narayan addresses this loss of sacred meaning in his book, The Painter of Signs, 1976. They saw the deity as an exotic piece of stone, not the living embodiment it was for the people who prayed before it. Techniques, practices, and the inner path in consumerism. As said, intergenerational trauma caused by wars and political upheavals has left a void in Western identity. However, at their core, yoga and Ayurveda are not designed for comfort. Healing and introspection are not rewards handed out freely. They must be pursued through determination, disciplined practice, restriction, and deep connection. In the quest for self-realization, authenticity, and overcoming trauma, the West has widely embraced spiritual concepts from the Far East. Yet, few participants in a yoga class or an Ayurveda workshop ever consider undertaking the long and demanding path of traditional education. Nor do many culture-driven travelers explore the depths of these philosophies beyond their surface appeal. Most ancient texts are not even in one single language, Sanskrit. Many are in regional dialects, making them inaccessible to those unwilling to engage deeply. The complex system of interconnected beliefs within Hinduism, defined by key concepts such as dharma and karma, offers a vastly different understanding of what the West emphasizes in its religious core beliefs: the soul, mind, and body, and an external God. Westerners who casually adopt Hindu-inspired phrases often fail to grasp its complexity. For instance, popular sayings like "wait" and "karma will do the rest" reduces karma to a simplistic cause and effect mechanism, ignoring its essence. In the West, karma is often conflated with Christian notions of resurrection, divine judgment, or original sin, making it a contradictory blend rather than an authentic understanding of responsibility for one's actions. Hindu philosophy, as mentioned earlier, is radical and demanding, yet Western interpretations often translate it into mere notions of peace and harmony, neglecting the discipline and obedience to order, dharma, that are fundamental to its practice. To bypass the discomfort of long meditation hours, the challenges of withdrawing from worldly distractions, and the discipline of consuming only what is necessary at prescribed times, Western yoga and Ayurveda instructors claim to have modernized, adapted, and even improved these ancient schools of wisdom. Some have gone so far as to trademark their own interpretations. This led to significant controversy when American yoga schools attempted to copyright asanas, yoga postures, sparking outrage in India. At this point, the line between appreciation and appropriation has clearly been crossed. As Arundhati Roy points out, she says, the struggles of colonialized people, their songs, their stories, are not just borrowed, they are contextualized, reframed as palatable, feel-good morsels of resistance for a global audience, from her book Capitalism, A Ghost Story, 2014. And a decade later she continued, when yoga became a worldwide craze, they stripped it of its rebellion. What was once a tool for liberation became a luxury for the privileged. We can agree that sacred traditions, when commodified, lose their deeper cultural and ethical significance. Today, yoga, as popularly represented in the West, is more aligned with the fitness industry than with psychological or spiritual well-being, where it rightfully belongs. Outfits that mock Eastern traditions like leggings and bralettes for yoga, but kurtas and bindis for festivals, and the purchase of religious figurines for mere decoration go hand in hand with the distortion of yoga. Looking at the two major branches of classical yoga, Hatha Yoga and Tantra Yoga, we find a profound philosophical system that extends far beyond physical exercise. From Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which begin by emphasizing one's duties towards oneself and society, to the ultimate stages of liberation, Pratyahara, Dharana, Jnana, and Samadhi, yoga is built upon rigorous self-discipline. These four last stages are not something to be practiced, but rather states of being that arise only after years of disciplined effort. They are given to you by God, my teacher Surinder Singh in Rishikesh says. However, in the early 1900s, Swedish gymnastics influenced yoga's physical practice in India, merging it with bodybuilding and contortionism. This hybridized form was then exported back to the West as authentic yoga, stripping it of its spiritual content and replacing self-inquiry with the pursuit of physical perfection. The yoga as a discipline is free of symbols, uniting through actions rather than objects. Western consumer culture has created an entire industry around yoga accessories, flooding markets with plastic yoga mats, on-printed t-shirts, and mass-produced figurines of Indian deities. Ironically, rather than fostering spiritual simplicity, this trend feeds the very consumerist hunger yoga seeks to transcend. Devdutt Pattanaik, a prominent scholar in the discourse of cultural appropriation, once remarked, he says, if you take Ganesh out of the temple and place him in a corner of your drawing room because he looks cool, you've stripped him of the sacredness that thousands of years of devotion endowed with him. Ayurveda, from sacred knowledge to consumer trend. Ayurveda, like yoga, emerged from the ancient Indian wisdom with its foundational text, the Ashtanga Hridayam, Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, dating back roughly 2,500 to 4,000 years. Rooted in Sankhya philosophy, Ayurveda not only emphasizes the interconnectedness of human beings with the universe, but also considers individual nature, environment, family, food, thoughts, and numerous other factors in diagnosing and treating imbalances. A key figure in Ayurveda is the Vaidya, the physician, a learned practitioner who diagnoses ailments through a complex system of assessments. This holistic approach, which requires years of dedicated study, has been drastically simplified in the West, where Ayurveda has been reduced to 20 wellness tips in lifestyle magazines. Instead of being recognized as a sophisticated medical system, Ayurveda is often presented as a collection of superficial hacks for health and longevity. This reductionism has led to the commercialization of Ayurvedic herbs such as tulsi, amalaki, and ashwagandha, which are now sold in Western drugstores as performance enhancers, sleep aids, or generic immunity boosters, often devoid of their original purpose or prescribed context and driving them to extinction. Moreover, the widespread mispronunciation of Ayurveda, frequently called Ayurveda, reflects a lack of genuine engagement with its tradition. The West's oversimplification of Ayurveda has tangible consequences, reducing its potential impact on severe medical conditions such as Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and autoimmune disorders, conditions for which conventional biomedical treatments offer limited hope. Thus, Ayurveda has been reimagined, mixed with Western wellness trends, and transformed into an easily digestible part of pop culture, attracting the globalized, privileged Westerner while losing its depth, nuance, and medical plans to exploitation. Ginger water and detox, the misrepresentation of Ayurveda. The widespread belief that Ayurveda offers nothing more than lifestyle tips, such as drinking ginger water during your menopause and attending detox retreats, reduces the vast system of medical knowledge to mere wellness trends. In reality, Ayurveda encompasses fields ranging from psychiatry to surgery, holding an extensive database of empirical knowledge yet to be fully explored. However, sometimes India's own people undermine efforts to deepen Ayurvedic knowledge by marketing it in a diluted mainstream context. The tension between a growing sense of national, sometimes nationalist pride in India's heritage and the pressure to meet international accreditation standards creates a complex field of contradictions. The need to prove Ayurveda's scientific validity has, often unknowingly, contributed to its commodification and the dismantling of its cultural roots. The speech is not a defense of quackery or unsupported claims. Too many assertions about ancient medicines are taken out of context or remain outdated. Instead, I call for a more holistic exploration of India's healing traditions, one that could astonish the modern world with a system that is deeply integrative and uniquely individualized. Unlike biomedical science, Ayurveda cannot always be weighed, measured, or universally tested, as its methods are inherently personal and context-specific. Meditation, a fundamental practice decontextualized. Meditation, a cornerstone of both yoga and Ayurvedic treatments for mental issues, was already stripped of its depth and radical practice when marketed in the West during the 1960s. Initially linked to Buddhism and yoga, meditation as well was reduced to a relaxation technique rather than a practice aimed to silencing the mind's chatter. As there are countless meditation techniques provided by the original texts in India, it is always the silent observation of the mind and its movement that is center of the exploration. Meditation is dealing with the root cause of human suffering, the hunger. The West couldn't stop himself from developing new techniques that in its very contradiction are for sale and are dealing with the effect, the symptom of the hungry mind. As Ram Manohar said in a private talk, meditation is for the healthy person. It requires strength to face the inner turmoil once the mind is taken off its supply of hungry thoughts. Devdutt Patnaik talks on this hunger in his podcast, saying that all creatures are hungry, all living organisms are hungry, but only human beings are limitless hungry. The description of this hunger, he continues, are named in words as ambition, aspiration, and greed. Meditation techniques for more success are therefore critically corrupting the very idea. When one looks at the cultural appropriation here, it is important to maintain the original context in order to gain the benefit, or we go to a state where the solution becomes part of the problem, so to speak, with Paul Watzlawick. Western trauma therapists such as Peter Levine, using meditation or its appropriation and treatments, have been simplified the sacred Om syllable in therapeutic settings, reducing it to a prolonged sound, stripping away its vibrational and philosophical significance. Unsubstantiated claims, repackaging, and self-fulfilling prophecies. Mindfulness, once an intricate part of Buddhist practice, was quickly extracted from its cultural and philosophical roots. As it gained popularity, concerns about the dangers of mindfulness emerged. What was once a profound spiritual practice became part of the self-help industry, selling millions of books with diluted teachings. The truth and essence of mindfulness, however, is something that can only be realized through disciplined practice. It is impossible to convince someone of its benefits. It must be experienced. Mindfulness in its true form is deeply rooted in South and Southeast Asian traditions. There is no shortcut. Yet, because of its universality, mindfulness can be practiced without any religious or philosophical framework. It is, by definition, a state of mind. In recent years, however, mindfulness has been rebranded as a tool for self-care, often reduced to self-indulgence rather than self-awareness. In Western psychology, aspects of mindfulness are sometimes used as mechanisms of control, encouraging inner observation and self-regulation, but detached from its broader purpose. In the New Age wellness industry, mindfulness has become a commercialized mystical concept, marketed through expensive retreats and esoteric publications. Rather than being a catalyst for social and political transformation, mindfulness in the West has often become a self-centered practice, an inward journey that neglects its communal and ethical dimensions. Studies have demonstrated the effects of mindfulness, yet critics argue that many of these studies lack sufficient patient data, long-term observations, or clear definitions of what was actually practiced and achieved, making it difficult to draw efficient conclusions. Yoga and Ayurveda are not designed for comfort. Devdutt Patnaik, a leading thinker on Indian contemporary culture and cultural appropriation, remarks, "When yoga became global, it became just an exercise. The essence was forgotten, the storytelling, the content, the inner journey was left behind in favor for convenience." From My Gita. Furthermore, the longing for self-contemplation and finding meaning in the materialist, saturated world of comfort directed the gaze toward instant findings and looking for appealing representatives. Gita Mehta, in her brilliant book Karma Kola, points out that the West not only romanticizes and commodifies inner spirituality, while simultaneously enabling fraudulent gurus who cater Western fantasies. Western seekers, in their desperate quest for enlightenment, tend to ignore or dismiss the complexity of Indian traditions and evade instead charlatans. However, this is not the end of the story, as in the end they feel betrayed by their own fiction when these figures fail to meet their expectations. She writes, India has as many gurus as rats. Not all of them scamper about the attics of Hinduism, but since the influx of Western disciples has become big business in the recent years, the guru has gone public like a corporate share issue. From her book, Marketing the Mystic East, 1979. She continues, it is hard to resist an I told you so attitude to the defections from the Enlightenment industry, as many disillusioned Westerners board on a plane in Bombay after being fleeced by the unscrupulous. The travelers arrived in India filled with exotic expectations. They part it full of cynicism, sometimes rage, unaware of the fact that they themselves created the guru they detest. Key of yoga and meditation is to end rumination, repetition, and addictive behavior by understanding the ever-changing nature of the mind and therefore breaking the cycle. It is important that some of the reinvented or modernized schools are promoting suppressing emotions, while even His Holiness the Dalai Lama encourages deeply to actually become more aware of any emotion, and that a lot of our suffering stems from control and suppression, not from contemplation and truly feeling them. The discourse of equanimity versus dissociation is a key topic in the Heart Sutra interpretation of Jack Goldstein. Modern gurus often emphasize exactly a wrong understanding by separating the emotion from the feeling, noting it is you who creates it, quote from Sadhguru, which is in a sharp contrast to the classical I as the observer, yet close to the victim shaming and far from the resolution of the ripples of the mind, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, is named in Patanjali Sutras. The internal struggle, India's role in Ayurveda's commercialization. Noting here again that not only the West scissors out parts of culture and bend it to its needs, commercializing sacred symbols, but as we had seen with the rise of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, later Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, Yogi Bhajan or Bikram Sadhguru, Indian-born or raised self-proclaimed gurus participated in the sales, glorifying themselves in the shine of international pop stars and celebrities like the Beatles, Christy Turlington, David Lynch, and numerous others. Interesting enough, it is to see that the later gurus not only engage in yoga but are selling Ayurveda as well, without any designated Ayurveda studies. Conflicting forces within the country contribute to its dilution. On one hand, a growing national pride seeks to reclaim India's ancient heritage, while on the other, international competition demands scientific accreditation and measurable proofs of Ayurveda's efficiency besides the Western New Asian occult Ayurveda sales. However, the demands from the West are tempting and corrupting with no doubt. The pressure to validate Ayurveda using Western scientific frameworks has led to its fragmentation and exploitation. Instead of preserving the holistic integrity of the system, some companies and practitioners have resorted and marketing Ayurveda in ways that compromise its authenticity, sometimes with dangerous consequences. A stark example in the controversy surrounding Patanjali Ayurveda, which faced global scrutiny after claiming to have developed a 100% effective cure for COVID-19. The company's assertion, announced in Haridwar, bypassed regulatory approval and was met with skepticism from the scientific community, as the magazine The Hindu reported in June 2020. Patanjali Ayurveda recent claims of having discovered a cure for COVID-19, bypassing every regulatory requirement without serious consequence, highlights India's weak scientific oversight. The company declared its product, Coronil, as 100% effective in a clinical trial, yet these claims were not backed by empirical scientific data. Such incidents undermine India's medical credibility, overshadowing its world-renowned Ayurveda surgeons and Ayurveda medical institutions. Despite hundreds of peer-reviewed studies on Ayurveda, the term pseudoscience continues to be used pejoratively, damaging India's scientific reputation. These claims are not backed up by any scientific empiric data and were immediately picked up by the international public and the international researchers community, and reduces India's high medical standards, its fabulous operation theatres and famous heart surgeons as much as the tremendous, until today not fully understood treasures of traditional medical wisdom and expertise. Vaidya Ram Manohar was wrongly quoted when he emphasized that unsubstantial claims could lead to public assumptions that Ayurveda is defined as pseudoscience even today, when hundreds of randomized studies are going on. Ayurveda research have been published in legit papers on ResearchGate or PubMed, to name only few. The term pseudoscience is used derogatively. The following quote is from the world's largest online library, Wikipedia, read in January 2025 on Ayurveda, and it needed to be included in here. It says, "The theory and practice of Ayurveda is pseudoscientific, and toxic metals such as lead are used as ingredients in many Ayurvedic medicines." This reference stems from Jeffrey Beall's article on pseudoscience, The Conspiracy Against Science from 2018. Beall dismisses Ayurveda research as tooth fairy science, arguing that its effects remain unproven. The persistence of such views highlights the challenge Ayurveda faces: a system of empirical science, misunderstood and mislabeled, struggling to find its place in modern healthcare. The speech does not seek to defend unverified claims, but rather to acknowledge empirical science as a phenomenon of holistic healthcare, one that should not be dismissed outright as pseudoscience. Keeping the doors open for Ayurveda's complementary use in modern medicine is crucial. Conclusion. From ancient Ayurvedic healing to the latest modern yoga industry, the West has played a dual role, demanding scientific validation while simultaneously commercializing sacred traditions and creating falsified replicas of cultural heritage. Meanwhile, India itself faces internal contradictions, struggling to balance cultural pride with the pressures of globalization. However, we have to understand that these two opinions are the very ends of the line, each on one side. We have to see their points of view and to be aware of their respective warnings. But the extremes should never dominate the discussions, as Devdutt Pattanaik states. They create awareness, but here we might miss the point of an integrative thought system of yoga and Ayurveda in the process. Ultimately, the question remains, can these traditions be reclaimed in their full depth, or have they been forever rebranded as commodities for mass consumption? It is crucial to foster open discussions on the balance between global recognition and appreciation of cultural traditions versus the imposition of intellectual dominance through colonialism and cultural appropriation. As traditional practices gain popularity worldwide, it becomes increasingly important to preserve the integrity of cultural values, heritage, and sacred symbols, rites, and rituals. The rise in practitioners, along with fraudulent claims sometimes originating within India himself, has led to the marginalization of authentic traditions, the exploitations for commercial gain, and the dilution of their wisdom. This not only threatens India's cultural heritage, but also deprives humanity of the depth and authenticity of its ancestral knowledge. Addressing these challenges requires a conscious effort to protect, honor, and sustain these traditions in their true essence. Vedya Manohara emphasizes that respect begins with representation. Indian voices must lead to conversations about the future of Ayurveda and Yoga, not remain in its margins. As cultural appropriation epitomizes a broader dynamics of power, exploitation follows on the footstep. Recognizing and addressing this appropriation requires a commitment to cultural accountability, equitable distribution. Only through such measures, yoga and Ayurveda can flourish globally without losing its depth, authenticity, and finally, significance.